So let's be realistic for a second here. If you're a gamer, and I'm a gamer, been one my entire life, if you're not in China, you're going to be heavily influenced by China. It's coming. It's coming. Why? Because it's going to be the biggest gaming population on the planet, and there's a lot of money to go around, and Chinese companies are throwing out some serious green. Don't believe me? Look at the Epic Game Store and all the stuff going on with that. Why? Because they're funded by Tencent. Tencent is going to use Epic's game stores to promote all of these things into China and elsewhere in the world, and it's going to get developers who like to have their games paid for by publishers and other entities to basically fall in line. And if you don't believe me, look at this here. This is a true story. This came out today. China fully bans depictions of blood and use of the word kill in video games. Yeah, because that seems, good for gaming, right? I mean, if you are a, regressive religious parent from the early 1990s who thought video game violence was going to turn kids into mass shooters, which it never did. There's been no proof of that. No absolute proof of that, at least. You can kind of see where this is coming from. The very regressive government of China and how restrictive they are doing this now. And it is going to trickle downhill the more popular and profitable that region becomes. Now, it says here, the Chinese government has introduced new laws banning what can be depicted in video games sold within the country. Previously, any depiction of blood, gore, or dismembered human body parts were banned in addition to skeletons and zombies, as it is considered dishonoring the dead and ancestors. One of the reasons why Ghostbusters 2016 never made it to China, because it dealt with ghosts, and that's considered a sin over there. These had been worked around in the past by changing the color of blood to something other than red and reworking skeletons and zombies into other kinds of monsters. And the thing is, if I'm fine with that, because that's not going to be impacting the rest of the game and its development for the rest of the world, right? We here in the United States, we like our blood, our gore, our boobs. But like in other places like Germany, you couldn't even show the Nazi flag for the longest time in video games because it was like, really? Oh, let's not do that. Let's not do that at all. But they, now I think they've relaxed that law a little bit or relaxed that ruling. But in China, they've only ramped it up, saying here that the ban has become much more stricter. In a new report, it notes that the country is banning anything that can be perceived as blood. In addition to the words kill cannot be used in the game in any way from the title to in-game text. Chinese tech giant Tencent Games have already adapted to this new law in at least one title. They handle the distribution of Player Unknown's Battleground mobile in China. The game has now been renamed Game for Peace. China number one, right? That's, that's the stupidest thing. Oh my God. This is what I'm talking about. If you're laughing at that, I'm laughing at that. That's why. In addition, the game's death animation has now been replaced with characters placing the items they were carrying on the ground and then waving goodbye before vanishing. You turn the corner, some dude lights you up with a saw, and you're all unload everything. One Twitter user says here that it was hilariously wholesome, which makes a lot of sense. While the Chinese government has begun approving games for sale again after a month-long hiatus, that was when they banned like Witcher 3 and other games. The Ministry of Education gave recommendations to 8 other regulatory bodies asking for less approvals of video games. These were in efforts to combat myopia and so-called video game addiction. Yeah. Video game addiction. It's one of those things where they're going to create this massive underground in China, this massive underground in China for these types of properties. You're going to want to get, it's like, there's going to be a guy in the street like, hey man, you want to get an uncut copy of Player Unknown's Battlegrounds? Oh, you mean Game for Peace? Yeah. Game for Peace, uncut. That is so stupid to me. It's absolutely ridiculous that the country is doing this, but it's their country. And you know what, they're going to do what they're going to do. China's going to China. We always know that. But when I talked about at the beginning of this video, how it's going to be impacting other countries, a few months ago, there was a big upset in the Rainbow Six Siege community when they decided to change some of the visual assets in the game in order to match China's new laws. And they were going to be doing this for everybody. And people lost their shit over there. Like, no, I need my casino. I need my gambling. I need my titties. They did that. They got really mad. And look, I'm not against it. I'm going to mock it a little bit of how hyperbolic it got because it did. But in the end, Ubisoft listened and Ubisoft said, okay, one version for China and one version for the rest of the world. And that's all well and good. And I'm fine with that. They want to adhere to Chinese law. That's cool. But a comment I made to my friend in that regard was, watch, they're going to take this now and they're just not going to tell you. They're going to adhere to Chinese law. And then that's going to be the norm. They're going to adhere to Chinese law and then maybe tweak it a little bit for the rest of the world, but it's predominantly going to be over for this. And that just seems to make the most amount of sense. It's like they're going to want to cut down on development time. They're going to want to cut down on all those aspects of it. And that they just don't tell you that they're doing something. People aren't going to be upset about it because they're not going to know. And that's kind of the biggest thing with all this, isn't it? If they just would have removed these assets and not really said anything about it, it ultimately would have gone unnoticed, or it would have been maybe a slight dust up, and then that would have been about it. But because they came out and tried to explain it, it only made things worse. So then they're keeping it to themselves, playing it closer to them, to their chest, is just going to be more, I don't know if people are going to call it anti-consumer. I don't call it anti-consumer for visual assets, but there is a certain level of decorum that we're used to in the Western part of the world, where there's a lot of people who play video games and they like it violent and bloody and chock full of body parts, zombies, skeletons, and boobs. They like that kind of stuff. And if that starts getting toned down, like look at Mortal Kombat 11, right? They toned it down. They said that it was because it was realistic body armor on the women. That's what they said. Now, I don't know if MK11 is banned in China. I'm assuming that it is, but they could be toning it down gradually to eventually enter into that marketplace. The marketplace with over 1 billion people, with I think 300 million gamers or something that's over there in China. There's a lot of money to be made. And there's especially a lot of investment money from Tencent, who's going to be throwing it around. And Tencent is going to want to then distribute it in China under Chinese strict guidelines, which means that these developers who are going to be wanting to sell to China are just going to tweak it in order to make it more, better for the rules there. And then the rest of us are not going to know, because how it's going to be. And eventually it's just going to be a 1-to-1 ratio or minor differences, but it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And there's ultimately, as far as I can tell, there's not a goddamn thing anyone can do to stop it. I mean, if you don't believe me, look at Epic Games Store coming out and just like offering $10 off any video game right now, including Borderlands 3, for pre-order, and you get like a massive discount on it and all of these things, and Tencent is eating the cost of that. Why? Because they're trying to get customers, and those customers are then going to feed into this larger thing and this larger world and this larger country, and that's what's happening. As much as I want Steam to have competition, and I do, I'm starting to get a little bit against Epic on this one, because it does feel like a bit of a slow takeover. Bit of a coup in gaming, because it's all tied to wanting to appeal to a very regressive, very restrictive government and the absolute high amount of gamers within that will rival the population of this country. So whatever happens next is going to be very interesting. So definitely keep your eye out on it. But I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know. Thumbs up the video, subscribe if you're new. Have yourself a great day, guys, and peace out.